When did you stomp on someone's masculine energy? I was working as a server at this upscale steakhouse downtown when my boss, Nathan, said he wanted one night with me. For 6 months, he'd been the overly friendly manager who always scheduled me for the best shifts and made sure I got the tables with big spenders. He'd compliment my work ethic while staring at my legs and find excuses to touch my shoulder when explaining new menu items. The attention was annoying, but I needed the money for nursing school. Nathan made sure I walked out with at least 200 in tips every night, even on slow Mondays. Other servers complained they barely made half that, but I kept my mouth shut. I figured dealing with his gross comments was worth the extra cash that was getting me closer to my degree. Everything changed on a Thursday afternoon when I walked in for my shift. Nathan was standing by the host stand with his arms crossed and no hard-on, with this look on his face like I'd personally offended him. He didn't say hi or ask about my day like usual. Instead, he handed me the worst section in the restaurant by the kitchen doors where the AC didn't work right. Throughout my shift, Nathan kept finding problems with everything I did. He said I was taking too long with orders even though I was moving faster than everyone else. He pulled me aside to criticize how I was holding the serving tray. When a customer complimented me to him directly, Nathan just grunted and walked away. The other servers kept asking if I was okay, because they'd never seen him treat me badly before. At the end of the night, I counted my tips and had only made $70. Nathan had been sending other servers to pick up my tables whenever big groups came in. He cut me early saying they were overstaffed even though 2 servers had called out sick. As I was leaving, he made a comment about my uniform looking sloppy even though I was wearing the same thing I always wore. This treatment continued for a whole week. Nathan moved me to lunch shifts where tips were terrible. He wrote me up for being 2 minutes late when he used to let me clock in whenever I arrived. He stopped scheduling me for weekend nights and gave those shifts to newer servers. My income dropped so dramatically I had to ask my roommate to cover utilities that month. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and cornered Nathan in his office after closing. I asked him directly what his problem was, and why he was suddenly treating me like garbage. He leaned back in his chair with this disgusted expression and said something that made my skin crawl. I had to find out from my wife that you're a lesbian. I stood there shocked for a second before responding. Yeah? So? Nathan's face turned red and he slammed his hand on the desk. He started ranting about how I'd led him on and made him look stupid. He said that I've never even gotten a taste of his masculine energy. That's when Nathan said something that made me realize how deep this went. He told me, "I can't believe you're making me do this. You owe me $5,000. That's the total amount of tips I stole from the rest of the servers to give to you for the past 5 months. I want it back. It's either that, or you give me one chance in bed to change your mind." My whole body went rigid and I couldn't move for what felt like forever but was probably 10 seconds. My mouth opened and closed like I was trying to find words that made sense. Finally, I managed to say he was completely insane if he thought I'd pay him money or sleep with him. My voice came out shaky and quieter than I wanted, but at least the words were clear. I turned toward the door and grabbed the handle. Nathan jumped up from his chair so fast it rolled backward and hit the wall. He moved between me and the door and said I couldn't leave until we worked this out. He kept saying he had records of all the money he'd moved around and how it would look bad for both of us. I sidestepped around him and yanked the door open harder than I meant to. My legs felt wobbly as I walked fast through the empty restaurant toward the employee exit. I could hear Nathan calling after me, but I didn't turn around or slow down. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely push the exit door open. The cool night air hit my face and I realized I'd been holding my breath. I fumbled with my phone and almost dropped it twice before I managed to dial my roommate. She picked up on the 3rd ring and I told her everything that just happened with Nathan. The words came out in a rush and I had to repeat parts because I was talking too fast. She told me to come straight home and we'd figure it out together. She also said to save any texts or emails from Nathan just in case. The drive home took 15 minutes but felt like an hour. I kept checking my mirrors like Nathan might be following me even though that was paranoid. My roommate was waiting at the door when I pulled up and gave me a huge hug. We sat at our kitchen table with my laptop and started pulling up my bank statements from the past few months. She made us coffee while I logged into my banking app and started scrolling through deposits. We spent the next 2 hours going line by line through every deposit since I started working at the steakhouse. My roommate wrote down the amounts on a notepad while I called out the dates and totals. The pattern was obvious when we looked at it all together. Before that Thursday, my deposits were consistently over $200 a night. After that Thursday, they dropped to $70 or $80 maximum. We calculated that I'd lost almost $800 just from this past week of bad shifts and terrible sections. My roommate pointed out that this was probably illegal and not just a crappy boss being mean. The next morning, I woke up early and couldn't go back to sleep. I made coffee and opened my laptop to start researching sexual harassment laws in our state. I found a government website that explained quid pro quo harassment, which seemed to match what Nathan was doing. The site said offering work benefits in exchange for sexual favors was illegal. It also said that taking away benefits for refusing advances counted as retaliation. I learned that what Nathan did with the tips might actually be criminal theft and not just a workplace issue. I bookmarked every relevant page and took screenshots of the important parts. After 3 hours of research, my eyes hurt from staring at the screen, but I had a better understanding of my rights. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down everything I could remember about Nathan's behavior. I wrote about every time he complimented my legs while scheduling me for good shifts. I documented each time he touched my shoulder when explaining menu items. I tried to remember the exact words he used when he made his ultimatum about the money or sex. I created a timeline starting from my first day at the restaurant 6 months ago. I went through my phone and found old texts from Nathan about shift changes and forwarded them all to my personal email. Some of the texts had weird comments about how he liked having me around, which seemed creepier now. Monday came too fast, and I had to force myself to get dressed for my lunch shift. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 5 minutes before going inside. My plan was to avoid Nathan as much as possible while staying near other people who could witness anything. I downloaded a recording app on my phone and tested it to make sure it worked. I kept my phone in my apron pocket with the app ready to record if Nathan cornered me. The lunch rush started slow, and Nathan assigned me to the terrible section by the kitchen again. The smell of grease was stronger there, and the noise from the kitchen made it hard to hear customers. He walked by my section multiple times, making comments about my appearance loud enough for other servers to hear. He said my hair looked messy even though I'd pulled it back the same way I always did. Then he wrote me up for having a wrinkled uniform, which looked exactly like everyone else's uniforms. The other servers kept giving me worried looks, but nobody said anything directly. During a slow moment between lunch orders, I found Alondra refilling salt shakers in the side station. I asked her quietly if she'd noticed anything weird with the tip distribution lately. She looked around nervously before admitting she'd seen Nathan moving money between the tip envelopes. She said she'd watched him take cash from other servers' envelopes and put it in mine for months. She also said he'd been giving me credit for tables I never served. Alondra looked scared and made me promise not to tell anyone she'd told me this. Over the next 2 days, I stayed late after my shifts pretending to help with closing duties. When nobody was looking, I used my phone to photograph the shift schedules posted in the break room. I took pictures of the section assignments showing how I'd gone from the best sections to the worst ones. I found the tip distribution sheets in the manager's office when Nathan was in the bathroom and quickly photographed those too. The evidence was clear when I looked at all the photos together. My sections had changed drastically after that Thursday when Nathan found out about me being a lesbian. Wednesday night, my phone buzzed while I was doing homework and I saw Nathan's name pop up on the screen. The text said we needed to talk about my attitude problem and the money I supposedly owed him. My hands shook a little as I took a screenshot and immediately forwarded it to my personal email for safekeeping. I typed back that any work discussions should happen at work during regular business hours and then turned off my phone. Thursday at work, Nathan kept glaring at me from across the restaurant but didn't approach me directly. Friday morning, I woke up exhausted because I'd been tossing and turning all night thinking about everything. I realized I needed to keep working there to gather more evidence even though being around Nathan made my skin crawl. I spent my lunch break scrolling through job listings on my phone, but most places wanted experience I didn't have. The stress was making it hard to focus on my nursing homework, and I kept falling asleep over my textbooks. Saturday afternoon, I sat at my laptop researching whether our state allowed recording conversations without the other person knowing. The legal website said I could record in public areas of the restaurant where there wasn't an expectation of privacy. I downloaded a recording app that automatically backed everything up to the cloud in case something happened to my phone. The app had good reviews and was easy to use, so I tested it a few times to make sure it worked. Sunday, I grabbed a yellow legal pad and started writing down every single time Nathan had given me special treatment. I listed all the Friday and Saturday night shifts he'd scheduled me for over the past 5 months. I wrote down every time he'd assigned me the VIP section where the businessmen always tipped big. I documented how he'd move me to better tables when high rollers came in even if it wasn't my section. The list filled 3 pages and the pattern was so obvious when I saw it all written out. Monday during our break, I found Alondra wiping down tables in the back dining room. I asked if she'd be willing to write down what she'd seen with the tip money and table assignments. She looked around nervously and said she really needed this job to pay for her mom's medical bills. We figured out she could type up what she'd witnessed without signing her name, and I'd keep her identity secret. She promised to email me her statement from a throwaway email account by the end of the week. That Friday afternoon, a group of 12 people walked in celebrating someone's birthday with balloons and everything. The hostess seated them in my section, and I started getting their drink orders when Nathan appeared. He told them their server would be right with them and sent me to clean the bathrooms instead. I snuck back to check the floor chart and saw he'd crossed out my name and written in another server's name. I took a quick photo with my phone showing the timestamp and the changes he'd made in pen. Saturday's pre-shift meeting was the worst one yet, because Nathan used it to humiliate me. He stood at the front of the room and said, maybe I wasn't cut out for the service industry after all. He criticized my attitude and said I was being uncooperative with management decisions about table assignments. The other servers stared at their shoes, and nobody said anything, even though they all knew what was happening. One server mouthed sorry to me when Nathan turned to write on the whiteboard, but that was it. After the meeting ended, everyone scattered quickly to avoid getting involved in the drama. That weekend, my roommate sat with me at our kitchen table helping me write an email to the restaurant owner. We kept it professional and didn't mention the sexual harassment or the stolen tips yet. We just said I had concerns about management issues that were affecting multiple staff members. My roommate helped me rewrite it 3 times until it sounded calm and factual instead of angry. We included a line about having documentation to support my concerns, but didn't specify what kind. Sunday night, we sent the email from my personal account, and I felt sick waiting for a response. Monday morning, while I was getting ready for my shift, the owner replied to my email. He said he could meet with me Wednesday at 4 o'clock, but warned me to keep things professional. He also said I should bring documentation for any claims I planned to make about management. The tone of his email made me think other people had complained about Nathan before, but nothing had been done. I wondered how many servers had quit instead of fighting back against Nathan's behavior. Tuesday morning, I walked into work and saw the new schedule posted on the bulletin board. My name was only on the schedule for 2 lunch shifts and nothing else for the whole week. Nathan had written a note at the bottom saying the changes were based on recent performance issues. I calculated that losing my regular shifts would cost me over $600 in tips that week alone. I took a photo of the schedule and the note he'd written about my supposed performance problems. The other servers saw me taking pictures, but pretended not to notice what I was doing. During my Tuesday lunch shift, Nathan assigned me to bus tables instead of serving customers at all. He said I needed to work on my attitude before I could handle customer interactions again. The busboy who usually worked lunch looked confused, but didn't say anything when Nathan told him to go home. I spent 4 hours clearing dirty plates and wiping tables while watching other servers collect tips I should have been earning. Wednesday at 4, I walked into the owner's office with my folder of evidence and sat down across from his big wooden desk. I spread out the timeline I'd written showing every date Nathan had given me, the good shifts, and moved tips around. The owner picked up each paper and read through them without any expression on his face at all. I showed him the screenshots of Nathan's texts about my attitude problem and the money I supposedly owed him. He wrote notes on a yellow pad while I explained how my income had dropped from $200 a night to $70. I mentioned that Alondra and other servers had seen Nathan moving money between tip envelopes and changing table assignments. The owner kept writing without looking up and asked if I had any proof of the tip redistribution besides my word. I showed him the photos of the schedule changes where Nathan had crossed out my name and written in other servers for the big tables. He leaned back in his chair and said he'd look into the situation, but couldn't promise any immediate changes to the schedule. His main concern seemed to be whether I was planning to sue the restaurant, rather than what Nathan had done to me. He asked if I'd spoken to any lawyers yet, and I said no, even though I'd already been researching attorneys online. The meeting ended with him saying he'd review everything and get back to me by the end of the week. Thursday morning, I checked my phone for the new schedule like I always did, and my name wasn't on it at all. I drove to the restaurant and found Nathan in his office doing paperwork. I asked about the schedule, and he said there must have been a mistake, but his smile said otherwise. Then he dropped the real bomb by saying my last paycheck and tips were being held for an accounting review. He claimed there were discrepancies in the tip reports that needed to be sorted out before any money could be released. The threat was clear as day, even though he kept his voice friendly and professional. I left his office and sat in my car for 20 minutes trying not to panic about rent coming due. That afternoon, I used $300 from my emergency fund to meet with Fernanda Palermo, an employment attorney I'd found online. Her office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax place, but she had good reviews. She looked through all my documentation for about an hour, asking questions and taking her own notes. She said I had a strong case for both sexual harassment and retaliation, based on the evidence I'd collected. She explained that Nathan's ultimatum about the money or sex was textbook quid pro quo harassment. The schedule changes and withheld pay after I'd refused him were clear retaliation that violated state and federal law. Fernanda pulled out a stack of forms and started explaining the complaint process step by step. She said I needed to file with both the State Labor Board and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission within specific time limits. The state would investigate the wage theft and tip issues while the EECC would handle the discrimination and harassment claims. She gave me templates for documenting any new incidents and said I should write down everything that happened at work every single day. She also warned me that once the complaints were filed, the restaurant would be notified within 2 weeks. The whole process would take months, but she said my documentation was solid enough to likely force a settlement. Friday morning, I went to the State Labor Board office and filled out their complaint forms with all the dates and dollar amounts. The clerk gave me a case number and said an investigator would contact me within 30 days. That afternoon, I drove to the federal building and filed the EECC complaint, which took 2 more hours of paperwork. They gave me another case number and a packet explaining my rights and the investigation timeline. Having those official case numbers made everything feel more real and scary than when it was just me collecting evidence. The weekend passed slowly while I applied for other serving jobs and tried not to think about my missing paycheck. Monday morning, I got a text from another server with a screenshot of an email the owner had sent to all staff. The email talked about the company's zero-tolerance policy for retaliation against employees who raise concerns. It reminded everyone that discussing workplace issues was a protected activity and that any retaliation should be reported immediately. He didn't mention my name, but several servers texted me that they knew it was about my situation. When I went in to clean out my locker that afternoon, servers gave me quick looks, but kept their distance. Tuesday, I was organizing my closet when Nathan called my phone from the restaurant number. I let it go to voicemail and he left a message asking me to come in for a friendly chat about resolving everything. Wednesday, I needed to pick up my name tag I'd left behind, so I went during the lunch rush when I knew it would be busy. Nathan saw me and followed me to the break room, closing the door behind him. He started saying we could work this out between us without getting lawyers involved. I stayed by the door and kept my responses short, just saying I needed my property and had to go. Another server walked in to grab her purse and Nathan immediately changed his tone to asking about my schedule availability. I grabbed my name tag and left while the other server was still there as a witness. Over the next 3 days, 3 different servers reached out to me privately about Nathan. One told me he'd made comments about her body when she first started working there. Another said he'd cut her hours after she'd refused to go for drinks with him after work. The third said she'd seen him take cash from the register and blame it on counting errors. They were all scared to file formal complaints because they needed their jobs to pay bills and support their families. I understood completely, but it still made me feel alone, knowing I was the only one willing to fight back officially. Thursday afternoon, Alondra emailed me from a Gmail account she'd created just for this purpose. She'd written a 2-page statement about seeing Nathan take money from other servers' tip envelopes and put it in mine. She described specific dates when he'd reassigned tables after seeing the customers were big spenders. She also wrote about hearing him make comments about my body and seeing him touch my shoulder constantly. She said she couldn't sign her real name, but wanted me to have her statement for my case. The other servers I'd talked to were too worried about their rent and car payments to put anything in writing. My school had a program where nursing students could work per diem shifts at local nursing homes, so I signed up right away since I needed money bad. The first shift started at 6 in the morning, and I had to be at the restaurant by 3 that afternoon. I changed into my server uniform in the nursing home bathroom and drove straight to work without eating lunch. My feet were already killing me from being on them for 7 hours straight. The nursing home paid $15 an hour, which was better than nothing, but not close to what I used to make in tips. I picked up 3 shifts that first week and barely slept between work, school, and studying for my pharmacology exam. My roommate kept finding me passed out at the kitchen table with my textbook still open. 2 weeks later, my phone rang while I was helping an elderly patient with their medication. The state investigator introduced herself and said she'd reviewed my complaint and needed all my documentation sent over immediately. I spent my lunch break scanning everything from my phone and emailing her the files. She asked me about Alondra's statement, and I forwarded that too, along with the timeline I'd created. She said the evidence looked solid and that they'd be contacting the restaurant within the next few days to start their investigation. The whole process would take about 6 to 8 weeks, but she seemed confident based on what I'd shown her. That same afternoon, I got a text from a coworker saying there was a new manager on the floor. I drove by the restaurant after my nursing shift and saw a different car in the manager's parking spot. The next day, another server told me Brian Whitfield had been brought in as temporary floor manager and that Nathan was only doing inventory and office work now. She said the whole vibe had changed and people weren't as stressed during their shifts anymore. I went in to pick up my last paycheck and noticed servers actually talking and laughing at the host stand instead of looking nervous all the time. Brian introduced himself when he saw me and said he'd heard about my situation and wanted to make things right. He handed me an envelope with my tips from the previous 2 weeks that Nathan had been holding. I counted $340, which helped, but didn't come close to covering what I'd lost over the past month. Brian said the disputed tips from the 5 months were still being reviewed by their accounting department and lawyers. I thanked him and left before anyone could ask me questions about what was happening with the investigation. The next Tuesday, I worked a double at the restaurant for the first time since everything started. The lunch shift was slow, but dinner picked up and I made decent tips without Nathan there to mess with my tables. Around 9 o'clock, a group of drunk businessmen started getting handsy and making comments about my uniform. I kept serving them professionally, but my hands were shaking as I carried their drinks. After they finally left, I sat in my car and couldn't catch my breath. My chest felt tight and I couldn't stop my whole body from shaking. I called my roommate crying and she stayed on the phone talking me through breathing exercises for 20 minutes. She kept reminding me that I was doing the right thing and that this would all be over soon. The next morning, the owner sent out an email to all staff announcing an internal audit of tip procedures going back 6 months. He said they were bringing in an outside firm to review all the records and interview servers about their experiences. Several servers looked relieved when they read it, and one whispered to me that she'd been missing tips for months, but was too scared to say anything. Another server said he'd noticed weird patterns in the tip sheets, but figured he was just bad at math. The audit team showed up that Thursday with boxes to collect all the tip records and schedules. Fernanda called me that afternoon suggesting we consider mediation to speed things up. She explained that waiting for the full investigation could take months, and mediation might get me compensation faster. The downside was I might have to accept less money, and Nathan might not face real consequences for what he did. I spent 3 days going back and forth about whether I wanted this over quickly or wanted to see him really pay for everything. Part of me just wanted to move on with my life, but another part wanted him to face what he'd done to me, and probably other servers too. I finally told Fernanda to set up the mediation, but that I wouldn't accept anything less than my lost wages. She scheduled it for the following week and said we'd spend the weekend preparing. Saturday morning, I drove to her office and we went through my statement over and over. She had me practice saying just the facts without getting emotional or angry. We did mock questions where she pretended to be Nathan's lawyer trying to trip me up. She taught me to pause before answering and stick to what I could prove with documentation. Sunday, we did another 3-hour session where she coached me on body language and staying calm even if Nathan denied everything or tried to blame me. She said the key was letting the evidence speak for itself instead of getting into arguments. Monday at work, a coworker pulled me aside in the break room and warned me that Nathan had been telling people I was making everything up. He was apparently saying I was just mad because he rejected my advances, and now I was trying to ruin his career. The gossip hurt, but I kept working my shift and didn't respond to anyone who brought it up. That night, I got 3 texts from Nathan's personal number asking to meet and talk things through like adults. I screenshot them and sent them to Fernanda, then blocked his number completely. She said she'd handle all communication from now on, and that I shouldn't have any direct contact with him before mediation. Setting that boundary made me feel more in control of everything for the first time in weeks. The mediation happened 3 days later in a conference room at some office building downtown. I walked in wearing my most professional outfit, and saw Nathan already sitting at the far end of the table with the owner and their lawyer beside him. Nathan's face was already red, and he kept tapping his pen against the table while staring at the wall behind me. Fernanda squeezed my shoulder as we sat down across from them, and opened her folder with all our documentation neatly organized. The mediator introduced herself and explained the process while I tried to keep my breathing steady. When it was my turn to speak, I read from the statement Fernanda and I had practiced, laying out the facts one by one. I explained how Nathan had given me preferential treatment for months, the inappropriate comments and touching, how everything changed when he found out I was gay, and then his demand for $5,000 or sex. The owner's lawyer took notes while the owner himself kept glancing at Nathan with this look that wasn't quite anger, but definitely wasn't support either. Nathan started talking before I even finished. claiming I'd misunderstood everything and that moving tips between servers was just standard practice to balance out slow nights. His lawyer jumped in saying there was no discriminatory intent and that schedule changes happen all the time in restaurants. The owner's lawyer leaned over and whispered something to the owner, who nodded, and then suggested we take a 15-minute break. During the break, Fernanda told me things were going well, because they clearly wanted this to go away quickly. When we came back, the owner's lawyer said they were prepared to discuss a settlement to avoid lengthy proceedings that would be costly for everyone. Fernanda presented our demands clearly, asking for back pay for all my lost wages from the bad shifts, and cut hours, a neutral reference letter for future employment, implementation of new anti-harassment policies with mandatory training, and completion of the tip audit with restitution for affected servers. The owner's lawyer countered with a lower amount and wanted a full non-disclosure agreement. We went back and forth for another hour with numbers and terms getting adjusted each time. Nathan kept trying to interrupt, but his own lawyer kept shutting him down, which told me everything about how this was going. After 3 hours of negotiation, we reached an agreement that included a financial settlement of $3,200, a neutral reference letter stating only my employment dates and position, mandatory harassment training for all management within 60 days, and the tip audit would continue with an independent firm. The settlement also included a limited NDA that let me discuss this with my therapist and partner, but not publicly or on social media. It wasn't the complete justice I wanted, but Fernanda said it was a solid outcome considering how these things usually go. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the restaurant's new HR person saying the tip audit was complete, and several servers would be getting checks. Alondra texted me that night saying she got $800 in back pay, and thanking me for speaking up because she'd been too scared to say anything. 3 other servers messaged me similar things over the next few days, which made the whole mess feel worth something. The settlement check came through the following week, and while it wasn't life-changing money, it covered what I'd lost, plus gave me enough cushion to not stress about bills for a couple months. I typed up my 2-week notice that same day, keeping it professional and brief with no mention of why I was really leaving. Brian handed me the promised neutral reference letter when I dropped off my resignation and said he understood why I needed to move on. Those last 2 weeks were weird, working shifts while everyone knew something had happened but not exactly what. Some servers were extra nice to me while others kept their distance like they thought drama might be contagious. My last shift was a Tuesday lunch that was so slow I only made $40, but I didn't even care anymore. After turning in my uniform and name tag, I sat in my car in the parking lot for a few minutes, just feeling relieved it was over. The CNA job at the nursing home started picking up my requests for more shifts once they knew I had full availability. The work was harder physically, but the environment was so much better without constant harassment and manipulation. The residents were mostly sweet, and the other CNAs actually helped each other instead of competing for tips. Within a month, I was working 4 12-hour shifts a week, which gave me 3 full days for studying. I paid my roommate back the $300 I'd borrowed for utilities plus extra for being so supportive through everything. My grades in nursing school actually improved once I wasn't dealing with Nathan's crap every day. I passed my pharmacology exam with an 88%, and my clinical instructor commented that I seemed more focused lately. The routine of working at the nursing home and studying felt normal in a way the restaurant never had. About 6 weeks after I left, Alondra sent me a text with a photo of the new management structure posted in the break room. Nathan's name was listed under inventory and purchasing with no mention of floor management duties. She said he had to complete 40 hours of harassment training and wasn't allowed to supervise anyone for at least a year. It wasn't the firing I'd hoped for, but knowing he couldn't pull the same stuff with other servers felt like enough of a win. That night, my roommate picked up Chinese food from the place down the street and grabbed a bottle of the cheap red wine we always bought for bad days. We sat on our couch eating lo mein straight from the containers while she poured generous glasses. She raised her glass and said we should toast to me standing up for myself even if the whole thing wasn't perfect. I clinked my glass against hers and took a big sip, feeling the stress finally start to leave my shoulders. We both knew Nathan should have been fired completely, but at least I was safe from him now and had some money to catch up on bills. The next morning, I opened my laptop and found a service industry forum where people shared workplace stories. I typed up a post about what happened without using real names or the restaurant's location. I explained how I documented everything and how important it was to save texts and take photos of schedules. Within a few hours, the responses started coming in, with some people saying I should have gotten more money and others thanking me for the reminder to document harassment. A server from another state messaged me privately saying my post gave her courage to report her own manager. Over the next few weeks, I picked up more CNA shifts at the nursing home, and my paychecks became steady and predictable. I wrote my roommate a check for the $300 I'd borrowed plus an extra $100 for being so supportive through everything. She tried to refuse the extra money, but I insisted because she'd kept me sane when things got really bad. My pharmacology exam was coming up, and for the first time in months, I could actually focus on studying. I spent 3 days reviewing drug interactions and dosage calculations, without worrying about money or Nathan. When I got my exam back with an 88%, I actually smiled in class for the first time all semester. My confidence in the school stuff was coming back now that I wasn't dealing with restaurant drama every day. The nursing home job was boring sometimes, but the residents were sweet and nobody tried to touch me or make gross comments. 6 months later, I still check my bank statements carefully and save screenshots of everything work-related just in case. Sometimes I see a manager at the nursing home talking to a young female CNA, and my stomach tightens until I realize they're just discussing shift coverage. I haven't completely gotten over what happened and probably won't for a while. But I'm passing my classes and have steady work, and know that I can handle whatever comes next in nursing school or anywhere else. Thanks for hanging out with me on this one. It's been a ride, and I'm glad we got to share these moments together. I'll catch you in the next one. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.